For what purpose does the honorable gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. McHenry of North Carolina pursuant to H-Res Zeta, I inform the House that Mr. McHenry will vote yea on the amendments on block number 2.
This does the honorable gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. McHenry of North Carolina pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. McHenry will vote yes on the amendments on block number 2.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member designated by Mr. Lawson of Florida, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lawson will vote nay on the Scott on Part B in block amendments.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Southern California seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Cardenas pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Cardenas will vote no on the amendments on block 2.
For what purpose does the honorable gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Bush of Missouri pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Bush will vote no on the amendments on block number 2.
I know like For what purpose does the distinguished gentleman from the state of Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Grijalva pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Grijalva will vote no on the amendments on block number 2.
What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Lowenthal pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lowenthal will vote no on the amendments on block number 2. As the member designated by Mr. Liu pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Liu will vote no on the amendments on block number 2. As the member designated by Ms. Barragan pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Barragan will vote no on the amendments on block number 2. As the member designated by Ms. Moore pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Moore will vote no on the amendments on block number 2. And as the member designated by Mr. Cohen, pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Cohen will vote no on the amendments on block number 2.
For what purpose does California seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Carter of Texas pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Carter will vote yes on in block number 2 to H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the distinguished gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Now, Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Representative Morelli pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Representative Morelli will vote no on the amendments on block number 2.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from the state of Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Payne of New Jersey pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Payne will vote nay on amendments en bloc number 2. And, Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Hastings of Florida pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Hastings will also vote nay on amendments en bloc number 2.
Does the Honorable Assistant Speaker seek recognition from the state of Massachusetts?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Mang pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Mang will vote yes on the amendments on block number 2.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Meng pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Meng will vote no on the amendments on block number 2.
For what purpose does the honorable gentlewoman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. McEachin, I inform the House, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. McEachin will vote no on the amendments on block number 2. And as the member designated by Ms. Porter, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote no on the amendments on block number 2.
All right. Am I reading that right? It's 240, right? That's how many people. On this vote, the yeas are 185, the nays are 243. The amendment en bloc is not adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The previous question is ordered on the bill as amended. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill as amended. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend the National Labor Relations Act, the Labor Management Relations Act 1947, and the Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act of 1959, and for other purposes.
The House will be in order. The House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Banks of Indiana moves to recommit the bill H.R. 842 to the Committee on Education and Labor.
Pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 19, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The noes have it. The motion is not agreed to. The gentleman from Indiana?
Ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device.
Gentleman from Virginia seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Cohen, pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Cohen will vote no on the motion to recommit. As the member designated by Ms. Moore, pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Moore will vote no on the motion to recommit. As the member designated by Ms. Barragan, pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Barragan will vote no on the motion to recommit. As the member designated by Mr. Lowenthal, pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House Mr. Lowenthal will vote no on the motion to recommit. As the member designated by Mr. Liu, pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Liu will vote no on the motion to recommit.
What purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. McHenry of North Carolina pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House that Mr. McHenry will vote yea on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Babin from Texas pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Babin will vote yea on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Baird of Indiana pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Baird will be a vote yes on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Lawson of Florida pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform that Mr. Lawson will vote no on the motion to recount.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Ruiz pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Ruiz will vote no on the motion to recommit.
Does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Napolitano pursuant to House Resolution Number 8, I inform the House that Congressmember Napolitano will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Good evening, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by the Honorable Mr. James Langevin of Rhode Island and pursuant to House Resolution Number 8, I'd like to inform the House that Mr. Langevin will vote no on the motion to recommit H.R. 842, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act of 2021. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Grijalva pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Grijalva will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. McEachin pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. McEachin will vote yes on the motion to recommit. No on the motion to recommit. As the member designated by Ms. Porter pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Mr. Speaker,
as the member designated by Representative Morelli pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Representative Morelli will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New Mexico seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Roybal Allard pursuant to House Resolution 8, I will inform the voice that Ms. Roybal Allard will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Kansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Allred pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Allred will vote nay on the motion to recommit. As the member designated by Ms. Holland pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Holland will vote no on the motion to recommit. As the member designated by Mr. DeFazio pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. DeFazio will vote nay on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Fudge pursuant to House Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Fudge will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Cardenas pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Cardenas will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Connecticut seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Wilson pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Wilson will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Mang pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Mang will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
As the member designated by Chairwoman Zoe Lofgren pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Chairwoman Lofgren will vote nay on the motion to recommit. The member designated by Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Chairwoman Johnson will vote nay on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Bonnie Watson Coleman pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Watson Coleman will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Washington seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Strickland pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Strickland will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Thompson of Mississippi, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Thompson will vote no. He will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Kirkpatrick, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Kirkpatrick will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Bush of Missouri pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Bush will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Payne of New Jersey pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Payne will vote nay on the motion to recommit. And Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Hastings of Florida pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Hastings will also vote nay on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Stubbe of Florida pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Stubbe will vote yea on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Rush pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Rush will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Moulton of Massachusetts pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Moulton will vote no on the motion to recommit.
Purpose does the gentlewoman from New Hampshire seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Pingree pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Pingree will vote no on the motion to recommit. And as the member designated by Ms. Lee of Nevada pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Lee of Nevada will vote no on the motion to recommit.
Members voted. Vote. The ayes are 206 and the nays are 218. The motion is not adopted. The question is now on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it.
Speaker, on that I demand the yeas and the nays.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Bonnie Watson Coleman pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Watson Coleman will vote yes on H.R. 842.
Purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Stubbe of Florida pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Stubbe will vote no on H.R. 842.
Purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Grijalva pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Grijalva will vote aye on H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Baird of Indiana pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Baird will vote no on H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Rush, pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Rush will vote yes on H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Good evening, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by the Honorable Mr. James Langevin of Rhode Island and pursuant to House Resolution 8, I'd like to inform the House that Mr. Langevin will vote yes on final passage of H.R. 842, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act of 2021. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Hastings of Florida pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Hastings will vote yea on H.R. 842. And Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Payne of New Jersey pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Payne will also vote yea on H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Fudge pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Fudge will vote yes on H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Kirkpatrick pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Kirkpatrick will vote yes on H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Moulton of Massachusetts pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Moulton will vote yes on H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New Hampshire seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Pingree pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Pingree will vote yay on HR 842. And as the member designated by Ms. Lee of Nevada pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Lee of Nevada will vote yay on HR 842.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Carter, Texas, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Carter will vote no on the final passage of H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Lowenthal pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lowenthal will vote yes on H.R. 842. As the member designated by Mr. Liu pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Liu will vote yes on H.R. 842. As the member designated by Ms. Barragan pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Barragan will vote yes on H.R. 842. As the member designated by Mr. Cohen pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Cohen will vote yes on H.R. 842. And as the member designated by Ms. Moore pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Moore will vote yes on H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Washington seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Strickland pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Strickland will vote yes on HR 842.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Cardenas pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Cardenas will vote aye on HR 842.
What purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Bush of Missouri pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Bush will vote yes on HR 842.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Meng pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Meng will vote yes on HR 842.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
As a member designated by Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Chairwoman Johnson will vote yea on H.R. 842. As a member designated by Chairwoman Zoe Lofgren pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Chairwoman Lofgren will vote yea on H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Virginia seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by Mr. McEachin pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. McEachin will vote yes on HR 842. And as the member designated by Ms. Porter pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote yes on HR 842.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Kansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Allred pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Allred will vote aye on H.R. 842. As a member designated by Ms. Holland pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Holland will vote aye on H.R. 842. As a member designated by Mr. DeFazio pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. DeFazio will vote aye on H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Ruiz pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Ruiz will vote yes on H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New Mexico seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Roybal Allard pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Roybal Allard will vote yes on H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Representative Morelli pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Representative Morelli will vote aye on H.R. 842. Thank you.
The gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Brian Babin pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Babin will vote nay on House Resolution 842.
For what purposes does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Napolitano, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Congressmember Napolitano will vote yes on H.R. 842.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from Connecticut seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Wilson pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Wilson will vote yes on H.R. 842.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Lawson pursuant to House Resolution 8, and I inform the House that Mr. Lawson vote yes on final passage.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Thompson of Mississippi pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Thompson will vote yes. He will vote yes on H.R. 842.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. McHenry of North Carolina pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. McHenry will vote no on H.R. 842.
members voted. Does any member wish to change a vote? On this vote, the yeas are 225 and the nays are 206. The bill is passed without objection. A motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Veterans Affairs be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 1276 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1276, a bill to authorize the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to furnish COVID-19 vaccines to certain individuals and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Strike all after Section 1 and insert the following. Section 2.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading of the amendment.
Is there, without objection? Okay. Without objection, the amendment is agreed to. The bill is engrossed, read a third time, passed, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
The Chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to Section 4D of House Resolution 8, 117th Congress, as amended by Section 18 of House Resolution 188, 117th Congress, and the order of the House of January 4th, 2021, of the following members to the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis.
Mr. Palmer of Alabama, Mr. Carter of Georgia, Mrs. Miller of West Virginia, Mr. Armstrong of North Dakota, Mr. Crenshaw of Texas, and Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio.
The Chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak to the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, over 500,000 dead, 44,000 dead or more in the state of Texas. The state of Texas, throughout the entire pandemic, remained one of the top hotspots of the nation. We started testing late, we started vaccinations, and still have not reached a certain percentage. But yet tomorrow, on March 10th, 2021, our governor has announced that there will be no mask mandate and there will be no restrictions on any form of entertainment, restaurants, any large gatherings. Tomorrow, March 9th, the people of Texas get a death notice. I'm asking my friends in Texas to wear your masks, socially distance, wash your hands. We are vaccinating as fast as we can, but I'm letting you know that Texas has all 5 of the variants of COVID-19. They have long haulers in Texas, people who have continued to have COVID-19 to save lives. I'm asking my fellow Texans, as I know President Bush used to always call us, our fellow Texans, to wear their masks, wash your hands, socially distance to save lives. Let's ignore wrong-headed advice and do what is right to save lives. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, Kerry McDaniel passed away in February at just 65 years of age from COVID-19 complications. He was described as can't be replaced, top-notch in every regard, an exemplary model of generosity and selflessness. Kerry loved serving his community and did so in various positions throughout the years. For almost 3 decades, Kerry worked for the Kentucky Department for Environmental Protection, and most recently, he was the Hart County Emergency Management Director and Solid Waste Coordinator. As a frontline responder, he worked hard to obtain personal protective equipment for Hart County from COVID-19. Throughout the county, he was known for his service and generosity to others. Kerry is survived by his dear wife, Vicki, his son, Curtis, his daughter-in-law, Tara, and his grandson, Briar Allen, and many other family members he loves so dearly. I am proud to have known Kerry. He's an exemplary citizen. He was a great, great friend. He will be missed by all who knew him. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
For the 1 in 8 Americans who will go to bed hungry tonight, for 60 million Americans out of work and the 40 million who fear they might be evicted tomorrow, for the 2.3 million women, a million mothers who have left the workforce, the American Rescue Plan is for you. It'll put money directly in your pockets, expand access to affordable health care and child care, extend unemployment insurance, housing, and nutrition assistance, support 27 million children with an expanded child tax credit. For the 1.4 million public sector employees who are out of work, our firefighters, our teachers, our frontline public health workers, our first responders, we're going to provide $350 billion for states and localities, $13.7 billion for my state of Illinois to get you back to work too. We can't fix everything. 524,000 American lives lost to COVID are never coming back, but tomorrow, when we vote to pass the American Rescue Plan, we will honor their memory. We'll make things a little easier for their loved ones. We'll get their kids back in school safely, their family businesses back in the black, cut child poverty in half, create 4 million new jobs. But most importantly, we will emerge from this crisis with an economy that is stronger, more equitable, and poised to growth for years to come. Thank you to all of my colleagues in the House and Senate who made this possible. Let's get this done.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Well, I'm from California, and almost 2 years ago, the state there passed a bill known as AB 5, which where all workers would be presumed as employees unless the worker can show that they satisfy all 3 prongs of what is known as the ABC test. So it went into effect in January of 2020, and it had quite a few exemptions in it, as fought for: barbers, musicians, translators, home inspectors, golf caddies, things like that. But after the bill passed, flaws are found in it. They had to go back and legislate again, add newspapers. They had to go back and extend the time for others where it would kick in. So what is happening? Here in this House, we run H.R. 842. Now, I had an amendment that would provide for some of those exemptions. This provides for 0 exemptions for this requirement that all would be presumed as employees. So we're going to go ahead and do it actually worse than the state of California passing the PRO Act without the exemptions. Government should be here to foster economic growth, not restrict it. The PRO Act would kill growth, squash innovation in the gig economy and the American economy. Why are we going backwards here when we can't learn from Californians' mistakes? I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute with unanimous consent.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of our nation's greatest asset, our workers, our essential workers, nurses, teachers, mail carriers, transportation, sanitation, and food industry workers. among so many others who have lifted the nation with their sacrifice and bravery. And just as they've supported us, we must support them by supporting unions. Attacks on unions and a series of significant actions by the former administration have weakened worker protections and in turn destroyed the middle class. That is why I was proud to just vote to pass the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, the most significant upgrade for workers' collective bargaining rights in more than 80 years. If we are to fully recover from this deadly pandemic and build back better, we must invest in and protect the rights of our workers to unionize. American workers and their families are depending on us. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I fear that H.R. 842 is going to have serious long-term negative consequences for entrepreneurialism here in America. I started a company 30 years ago out of my college dorm room at Caltech, and I grew it the way that most small businesses are grown in America. I grew it organically. That means that when I had a little bit more business than I myself could do, I contracted that business out to other people that could do that business for me. Under this bill, that practice will be illegal because it violates the so-called B pillar of the bill that prohibits any contracting that's related to the core business that a company engages in. Mr. Speaker, if H.R. 842 had been the law of the land, I would not have been able to start my company, and the hundreds of jobs that we've created would not have been created here. But, Mr. Speaker, they will be created elsewhere in other countries with more sane and less restrictive laws. I urge a no vote on H.R. 842. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, 1 year ago, almost to this very day, is the day when COVID-19 was officially declared a pandemic. 1 year ago, we didn't know that this pandemic would infect millions of Americans or kill thousands of Texans in my home state and hurt so many disadvantaged communities. But after a year of darkness, we are finally seeing the light because the House will pass tomorrow the American Rescue Plan, which is a comprehensive plan that the Biden-Harris administration and our Democratic-led House and Senate has crafted, which will give constituents in the district that I represent and all Americans a chance for some relief. Our plan will help crush COVID-19 virus and get the economy moving again by getting vaccines into the arms of the country. Because in places like my home state of Texas, where Greg Abbott who's the governor, is prematurely lifting COVID-19 restrictions, the best thing we can do to combat a potential surge against the virus is to make sure that everybody has a vaccine. That's why I'm a proud supporter and will vote for the American Rescue Plan tomorrow, because we need a bold solution like this one for our country and economy to get back on the right track and to get back on normal.
For what purpose does the distinguished gentlelady from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today as a Michigander as my home state is recognizing 1 year from the arrival of our first cases of COVID-19. I rise today to say that more help is on the way, that today we are delivering for the American people and delivering for my home state of Michigan. I rise today to say that we passed the PRO Act to stand up for hardworking Michiganders, that we will get rid of right to work, that people are at the heart of what we do here in this chamber. And by prioritizing the legislation that stands up for hardworking Americans, we are delivering for them. Tomorrow we will pass the Butch-Lewis Act. We will write the pensions of almost 1 million Americans. That is what we came here to do. That is what unity is. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to begin with, just because my friend from Tennessee had someone that was very special in his life he wanted to talk about, I'm going to yield some time here. So please, it's all yours.
I'd like to thank my friend and colleague from Arizona. And I stand here tonight saddened because a little over a year ago, I took to the House floor to pay tribute to a dear friend, Peggy Daniel of West Tennessee, who had recently passed away. Today, we honor the life of her son and my friend, Drew Daniel, who left us way too soon. Drew passed away last week. He was a native of West Tennessee, the son of my friends Peggy and Jimmy Daniel. Drew moved to Shelby County in the early 1990s for college, and he received his bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Memphis, where he then later achieved a master's degree in public administration. Drew interned in the House of Representatives for then Congressman Don Sundquist, who also was a close and dear friend of Drew's parents. Drew loved to volunteer for his community, and he was an active member of the Boy Scouts of America, the Midtown Rotary Club, and Memphis City Beautiful Commission. Drew was also extremely active in the Shelby County Republican Party and the Tennessee Republican Party. He had served as the Shelby County Young Republican Chair and was an elected member of the Tennessee State Executive Committee of the Tennessee Republican Party. In 2019, Drew was selected as a Tennessee Republican Party Statesman of the Year. Drew was also a longtime valued employee for David Lenore in the Shelby County Trustee's Office, and then an agent for New York Life. Without a doubt, Drew was a dedicated leader with a heart for public service and also for volunteerism. I really don't know many more people who are more passionate about politics or their community than Drew Daniel. And I have so many memories seeing Drew and Peggy cheering on the Memphis Tigers in the Liberty Bowl and the FedEx Forum. Truly, as good of a person as Drew was, he was a great son to his parents and a terrific brother to Mike and to Melanie. We're all better because of Drew, and he will be deeply missed by everyone. Roberta and I extend our deepest sympathies to his brother Mike and his sister Melanie. Rest in peace, Drew. And I thank my friend from Arizona.
Thank you. And look, when we have someone special in our districts like that, sometimes with the chaos around here, it's hard finding time. So, Mr. Speaker, one of the things I wanted to do this evening is actually start to build on a theme that I've done in the past and I hope to be able to do over the coming months. But it's a little difficult right now because, let's be honest, the House is spending money at a pace where it's really hard for the Joint Economic Committee, even my own staff, to try to keep up. So we're going to talk about what's going on. But a couple things I really want us to sort of start to put on the record, talk about, and get our heads around. I have an absolute fixation of a moral obligation to the working poor in this country, and an understanding of what happened in 2018 and 2019 when the working poor, the value of their labor, and understand, for many of us, have graduate degrees and those things, can work behind a computer, great. Our skill set is what we're selling. For much of the working poor, if you didn't finish high school or you have moderate skill sets, your labor is your value. And what's going on here right now is almost a type of economic violence to that labor value. Yet I'm not sure my brothers and sisters on the other side even see it. So let's first delve into a little bit of what's going on at the border. do understand one of the things we see in the math from 2018, 2019, when the working poor got dramatically less poor. The first 2 years in modern times where income inequality shrank. Not because rich people got less rich, it's because poorer people made money. The value of their labor increased because they weren't competing with armies of other unskilled labor. If we're going to be honest around here and say we care about the poor, we care about the working poor, don't you see the economic violence we're allowing to happen at the border, making our folks have to compete with floods of moderate to low-skill immigrants? I know it's an uncomfortable conversation, but we need to see it in the totality of the people we claim we care about. And then the other day, I made the mistake of, on one of the hard left-leaning television, cable television shows, they were trying to compare what we did in tax reform to the Democrats' $1.9 trillion spending bill. And said, well, they're both about $1.9 trillion, but look here, this went to tax cuts, where this goes to spending. Isn't the spending so much more wonderful? Once again, I need my brothers and sisters on the left to go back to school and spend a moment paying attention in their economics class. The elegance of the tax reform was it made the value of workers' labor more valuable because the economy grew. We specifically made it so businesses would take part of that tax reform and put it into things that made their businesses more productive, making it so you can pay people more. Remember, individuals' wages go up on two things: inflation and productivity. It's one of the reasons in 2018 and 2019 we had the fastest wage growth of workers, and particularly the working poor, in modern history. So what's the Democrats' solution to help these populations? We're going to send them a check, and maybe part of that's good. There are people out there who are really suffering and hurting. But what do we do next year? The elegance of when you have someone's labor become more valuable is that value sets, and then the next year it builds on it, and the next year it builds on it, and the next year it builds on it, and after a little while, they're no longer in the working poor. We're going to do a patch that's going to load another $1.9 trillion of debt. And over the decade, the amount of interest we're going to pay on that, it's not a $1.9 trillion, it's probably $1.6 trillion. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about just really quickly here. I cannot produce these boards fast enough to keep up with the Democrats' spending agenda right now. CBO can't produce the data fast enough. Joint Economic Committee can't produce the data fast enough to even get our heads around. So this slide here is from September. Understand, the numbers are much uglier today. And it was a simple point. In functionally 8 budget years, in September, we were saying each family would have $230,000 of federal debt applied to their household. The amount of debt, and so that's every household. That's not tax-paying households, that's every household. Today, my back-of-the-napkin math is about $250,000 in 8 years for every family in America. We are spending that fast. And being the father of a 5-year-old, the economic violence I see being done by the left here to her future, to the kids' futures. I'm looking for the day I have to sit her down and apologize that she's not going to live as well as I've lived because what we allowed to happen here today. So let's have a quick education. Let's walk through real quick where the money goes. Social Security, about $1 trillion. And remember, this is based on last year's numbers. Today's, these numbers have ballooned again. Defense, $724. Medicare, right now, I believe this year, has now surpassed defense. So my last bit of math was Medicare was now starting to pass defense in total spending. Health, that's Obamacare, that's all the other entitlements. But if you actually look at this slide, Social Security, Medicare, the other health entitlements, income security, interest, veterans, it's the vast majority of spending. Yet you look at these tiny little slices, like this little slice over here is foreign aid. Yet how often do the politicians get behind these microphones and say, well, if we would cut foreign aid, if this were a clock, I think foreign aid would cover about 14 minutes of spending in an entire day, in a 24-hour day. If we don't get our heads around the fact that the Medicare, the health entitlements, the net interest are the things now which will drive our debt, I'm terrified of what's coming. Because do understand, it's really hard to say, but our demographics, we are getting older very quickly as a society. And if you look at the 30-year curve, we are a country that doesn't make it. We are so buried in debt. And what the economic violence the Democrats are committing tomorrow by adding another $1.9 trillion on top of the trillion that's already still sitting in the bank and hasn't even been expended, that we've done this last year, are we thinking about anything other than our next reelection? How about thinking about my 5-year-old daughter and what her economic future is? How about everyone else's economic future? So I'm going to try to do a couple of these quickly. We were trying to use CBO's numbers. The problem is they haven't updated them yet on how fast we're spending. But what's so important here, in functionally 8 budget years. Now this slide looks a little different than your typical debt slide because we calculate it on debt that's sold to the public, not internal debt. Remember, when you look at U.S. sovereign debt, there's sort of 2 pies. There's stuff where we reach into the Social Security fund, grab that money, and borrow itself and put IOUs in it. The other debt that is economically dangerous because when interest rates move, it causes a problem. And we're going to talk about that in just real quickly. This is debt sold to the public. That's be China, it might be Japan, it might be your grandma's pension. In about 8 years, debt held by the public will double from where we were last year. Understand how fast. Now, a lot of this, believe it or not, even though some of the crazy spending we're doing right now, is our demographics. Demographics aren't Republican or Democrat. It's just math that we don't like to talk about. But the fact of the matter is we've made promises, and the money that we collected for those promises, we've already spent. And we're going to have to borrow. So understand the fragility. I love that word. Fragility we've given ourselves. Interest rates in January were under 1%. They were actually at 0.91. Today, the market closed, I think it was 1.54, something of that nature. Most of us go, big deal. This is still historically really, really, really cheap. Except think about it. Just that little movement in the last 2 months, that's about $600 billion over the next 10 years, just that little movement. $600 billion of interest. What are we buying with that interest? Nothing. And there's a lot of economists out there that think because we're spending at such a fast rate, we are going to start to chase our tail. Part of that may be because the economy actually is getting healthier. One of the great intense ironies is we're about to spend $1.9 trillion, pretend it's a stimulus, even though a bunch of that money doesn't get spent for a year, 2 years, a little bit 3 years from now. Claim it's a stimulus, pile it on as debt that's going to cost $2.6 trillion with financing costs added to it, but only a sliver of it's actually economic stimulus. And because we're going to the markets to finance every dime of it, we're helping drive up our own interest rates, meaning we're going to chase our tail economically. Do understand, remember the pie chart from before? That interest right now, we expect, and within about a decade, interest may be the second most expensive thing in our budget. You will be seeing Social Security, Medicare, and then interest right up there, and that's going to consume everything. There functionally will be no more money left. And I know I'm getting a little thick, but to try to drive this home, the changes in debt that happened from where CBO was projecting back in January to some of the numbers we're seeing right now. So just for the fun of it, I know this is hard to read. We just did a calculation and said, hey, CBO basically said, hey, interest rates are going to go up 0.25%. Think of it as 25 basis points. But if we went up 100 basis points in interest, over the 10 years of financing of that, we're basically looking at, what is that? Another $3.5 trillion of financing cost. So yes, you get to say we're spending at $1.9 trillion today, but do you understand the total cost of that? So it's not just the cost of the legislation. It's the cascade effect you're creating to the economy where that family wants to buy their first home. You just raised their mortgage interest rates. But on a national basis, this year we will finance probably about $10 trillion. My quick estimate is about $7 trillion are just our bonds that are rolling off that we have to refinance because we have no cash to pay for them. So they get reset at the new interest rates. Then we have our typical spending, so there goes another $1 trillion plus the $1 trillion we authorized back in December and last year, and now another couple $1 trillion, so maybe another 4 on top of that 7. And you start to look at over $10 trillion of new issue or refinancing coming to market of U.S. sovereign debt. What did we just do to our interest rates, the world interest rates, the value of money? And this comes back to my early point. We talk about what is happening in income inequality, the working poor. Those of us who have stocks or have a house or have assets, when you do this type of monetization of debt, when it requires the Federal Reserve to keep pumping in. Today we have 20% more cash floating around in our economy than we had a year ago. People who are wealthy own things. They make a lot of money because their assets get more and more valuable. The working poor who don't own a house, they don't own stocks, they don't have a bond, they don't have a pension. What they have, they get crushed. That's what we're doing to the working poor here. Please, someone buy an economics book for my Democrat brothers and sisters to understand there's going to be a lot of singing and happy in a couple months when they get the check. And next year when they realize they're being crushed, who will step up and actually take blame saying, we could have done things that would have grown the economy, grown your future income, made so the working poor actually had a future. Instead, we're going to flood the market with competing labor. We're going to devalue anything you could ever buy, or any asset you have, and we're going to make it so you can never afford to get out of the quartile where you're trapped. And this is what leftist policies do to poor people. So, look, this is a theme. We're going to build on it, and we're going to bring in more and more data and facts and see if we can turn around some of the heads here to say it's not enough to talk that we care. It's when you actually can stand up and say, Republican policies in 2018, 2019, before the virus, we actually made a difference. We're the party that actually closed income inequality. We're the party that actually made the working poor less poor. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, is recognized for 32 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my friend from Arizona for his very informative speech here about our coming, looming economic issues. Thank you, Mr. Schweikert. For the last 2 weeks, the majority has attacked the First Amendment, and now they are attacking the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment clearly states the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And as Justice Scalia noted in his decision in Heller, the Second Amendment does not give Americans a right, it protects a pre-existing right. Hence the phrase, shall not be infringed. Our theme for the next 30 minutes will be about H.R. 8 and the damage it will do to the Second Amendment, which is, as Justice Scalia noted, a pre-existing right. I now am pleased to yield 2 minutes to my friend from Georgia, Mr. Heiss.
I thank my friend from Arizona, and we are all concerned with this bill, H.R. 8. And the reality is the big money donors and powerful special interest groups behind the Democratic Party, for a long time, they've sought to undermine and restrict and even eliminate the Second Amendment rights of Americans. And with the Democratic Party now calling the shots here in Washington, quite frankly, the majority party is not even trying to hide their true agenda. Masquerading as supposedly good faith proposals to end gun violence, what they're really putting in place are the stepping stones to create a national firearm registry and eventually even confiscate firearms. H.R. 8 is being considered later this week, and it would implement a universal background checking system. The majority claims that this is an obvious solution to gun violence, but that is simply not the case at all. Gun violence in America is complex, and so are the solutions. But the overwhelming majority of criminals would not be stopped by H.R. 8 whatsoever. In fact, the Justice Department itself, by its own data, says that 75% of criminals in prison who possessed a firearm obtained it through theft, the black market, or family and friends. Secondly, we know that the vast majority of mass shooters would have been able to pass background checks. This bill does not in any way end gun violence, but what it does do is create a national gun registry that will eventually be used against law-abiding Americans. Without a permanent database of who owns the firearms, the federal government would not be able to determine whether a private firearm transfer took place with the required background check. And so that brings us to the real aim of this bill, H.R. 8. It paves the way for this database to be used at a later date in a national gun confiscation program. And listen, don't take my word. Even President Biden himself in August 2019 said that he does support confiscating assault weapons, which he would consider AR-15 style. So folks, listen, the threat is real. We're in a major fight for those who are trying to dismantle and eliminate the Second Amendment. We're not blowing smoke here. H.R. 8 is a massive move in that direction, and we stand here tonight to say no, we're not going to allow that to happen on our watch. We've got to be vigilant. We've got to stand on guard for our freedoms. And again, I thank the gentleman, my friend from Arizona, for yielding me these couple of moments.
I thank the gentleman, and now it's my pleasure to yield 2 minutes to my friend from Ohio, Mr. Davidson.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank this body for still continuing the tradition of this opportunity to speak and have our voices heard. Even though we're in the minority, we don't control the floor, we can't put our bills on the agenda to have a debate. Often we can't even get an amendment considered on the bills. The Rules Committee strips out anything that would materially change a bill. And sadly, that's been a bipartisan approach to governing in this body. That's not a functioning legislature when those kinds of things happening. And why is that important? Every member needs to have their voice heard. and they should be heard on this bill. This should be heard whether this body wants to change our constitutional protections fundamentally. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The majority doesn't seek to amend the Constitution, but they seek to nullify that constitutional guarantee with subterfuge. They say this is a background check bill. Well, every commercial firearm transaction today already requires a background check. That doesn't matter whether you do it at a gun store, at a gun show, at any other forum. If you buy a firearm from a commercial seller of firearms, a federal firearm license holder, you have to do a background check. You can't do it. Now, what does this do? It basically says if you want to even loan a gun to a family member to go on a hunting trip, you got to get a background check. Someone will be criminalized for doing that. You can't have private transfers. Essentially, the government says you can't be trusted to sell a firearm to anybody. You have to go to a licensed agent of the federal government. And how do they guarantee that? They guarantee that by creating a registry. Now, why should we be concerned about that? Well, that's the path towards seizing it. It doesn't guarantee that the government will do it. But let me tell you about a Supreme Court case that's right now. Under the Fourth Amendment, there's a clause that's been interpreted by court opinions to allow seizures for community care. Warrantless seizures of property. This goes with civil asset forfeiture, all kinds of abuses of warrantless surveillance. The Fourth Amendment, if we do not stand up and defend the Second Amendment today, it will be just as abused as the Fourth Amendment guarantee of privacy is today. We have to oppose this bill. The people of the United States of America are constitutionally guaranteed the right to keep and bear arms, and this body shall not infringe it and shall not be infringed without a constitutional amendment, and that is not what's on the floor today. I urge everyone to oppose H.R. 8 and any such effort to deny American citizens the protections our Constitution guarantees. And I yield.
I thank the gentleman. And now it's my privilege to yield 2.5 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Budd.
Thank you, Chairman Biggs. You know, as a federally licensed gun store owner, I have a unique perspective on our Second Amendment rights. And I actually happen to know how background checks actually work. It seems that H.R. 8 is being sold as universal background checks. And it would impose harsh penalties like six-figure fines and jail time for the simple act of handing a firearm to another person, even for temporary use, like instruction. The exemptions under H.R. 8 are woefully inadequate to protect the rights of law-abiding gun owners. Let's say that you loan your firearm to a victim of domestic violence because their abuser is just getting ready to be released from jail. Or if a suicidal friend asks you to take possession of their firearm. Or if you loan your cousin a gun after a series of burglaries in their neighborhood. These new transfer penalties would turn law-abiding citizens into criminals. We simply cannot sacrifice our rights by passing laws that will make our families less safe, and laws that criminals will simply ignore. We must always protect and preserve our God-given Second Amendment rights. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his speech and his time in yielding back. It's now my privilege to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Good.
Shall not be infringed. Shall not be infringed. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. James Madison, our fourth president, the primary architect of the Constitution, and the first congressman from Virginia's 5th District, said, Americans have the right and advantage of being armed, unlike the citizens of other countries whose governments are afraid to trust the people. Our right to arm and defend ourselves is a God-given right, and we're privileged to live in a country whose founders had the wisdom and the strength to codify that right in the Constitution. James Madison and our other founders recognized that this was a fundamental right to protect our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And they had the foresight to include this right among those first 10 amendments listed in the Constitution, which were intended to protect us from our government. It was James Madison who also said, "The truth is that all men having power ought to be mistrusted." The Second Amendment is not about hunting. That's great. It's not even primarily about self-defense or protecting our family. That is essential. It's about being a check against tyranny and to ensure we remain a free people. There's a reason it was the second right listed in the Bill of Rights, second only to the First Amendment protections of life, our right to free speech, assembly, and worship. The Second Amendment is the guarantor or protector of all other rights. If our Second Amendment right is not safe, no rights are safe. And with this Democrat majority in this Congress, this right is not safe. In my last quote tonight from James Madison, he also said, "I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations." We're witnessing the gradual encroachment on our fundamental Second Amendment right today by this Democrat majority. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I now yield 2 minutes to my friend from Texas, Mr. Cloud.
Thank you, Chairman. What we are considering here today with H.R. 8 has been dubbed a universal background check bill. But in reality, it would criminalize, and let me say that again, it would criminalize the private transfer of firearms. As part of the march to strip Americans of their guaranteed Second Amendment right, this gun control bill would make it a crime to sell or to transfer a firearm without first seeking permission from the almighty government. The dirty secret is that the proponents of gun control want you to think that this is the end of the road, when in fact that's not true. In 2013, President Obama's Department of Justice's National Institute of Justice said that the effectiveness of universal background checks depends on requiring gun registration. And so what we're witnessing here today is the first step to requiring a nationwide gun registration in America. The Second Amendment to the Constitution says, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." In this nation of the people, we the people, we recognize that us as citizens are not subjects of our government, that our inalienable rights are not a grant from the government, but a gift from God. And to that end, the Second Amendment doesn't grant us a right, but rather those carefully crafted words acknowledge an already existing right, the right of the people to possess a firearm. The Constitution does not say you may or may not be able to own a firearm. We'll circle back with you. We'll get back to you on that. It doesn't. It guarantees the right. This bill does nothing to make communities more safe. This is another overreaching attempt by leftist leaders drunk on unchecked power to control the lives of freedom-loving citizens. I ask my colleagues to oppose this legislation, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. It's my pleasure now to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman.
Mr. Speaker, the right of the people to keep and bear arms in the United States is a fundamental principle expressed in our Bill of Rights. Let me be clear, I will never do anything to infringe upon this right clearly laid out in our Second Amendment. But this bill, H.R. 8, will do just that. H.R. 8 is a sweeping piece of legislation that imposes burdens on the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. It's plain and simple. This bill is another attempt by Democrats to limit the rights of the American people. This legislation would make it a crime, subject to limited exceptions, to simply hand a firearm to another person. This bill could trigger penalties of up to a year in prison and a $100,000 fine. This bill would make it illegal to transfer a firearm to another person during a life-threatening emergency that could be considered a crime punishable by monetary dollars. Also, just so we're on the same page, universal background checks do not stop criminals from possessing firearms. As my colleagues on the other aisle have said, in the United States, less than 1% of criminals who had possessed a firearm during their offense got firearms through legal channels. Less than 1%. That means that these criminals obtained their firearms outside of a setting that would require a background check
to begin with? What makes you believe that this legislation would change that? Our solution should be focused on improving access to mental health care services, addressing the root causes of violence, and carrying out our existing laws through investments in our law enforcement and community programs, not walking all over law-abiding citizens from protecting their loved ones. We all swore to uphold the Constitution, and it should be our goal in this Congress to work against legislation like this that would clearly infringe on our Second Amendment rights of American citizens. I will be a resounding no when it's time to vote. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. It's now my pleasure to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Green.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to Democrat gun control bills far and wide, and I'd like to tell you about a gun law in Georgia. In order to provide for the emergency management of the city, and further in order to provide for and protect the safety, security, and general welfare of the city and its inhabitants, every head of household residing in the city limits is required to maintain a firearm together with ammunition therefor. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Kennesaw, Georgia, where over 6 years there's only been one murder and a violent crime rate of less than 2%. Would you like to know why? It's because every single criminal knows that if they're going to attack someone in Kennesaw, Georgia, they're going to go across a gun owner. And it's the law that every household and homeowner owns a gun and keeps one in their household. You see, guns are not scary. The fact that we may not have guns is scary. Guns are a great form of protection. It is an equalizer to a criminal who could care less about all the gun laws that Democrats want to pass on Americans, infringing on their Second Amendment rights. H.R. 8 and H.R. 1446 are just more gun control legislation violating Americans' great right to bear arms. I rise in opposition of both of these bills, and I hope that the Democrats will come to their senses and figure out that gun rights are American rights. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady from Georgia. It's now my pleasure to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Boebert.
Thank you, Chairman Biggs. Mr. Speaker, in 2019, as a private citizen, a mom, a small business owner, I was ticked off that a politician running for President of the United States wanted to strip away our enumerated constitutional rights. So with my Glock on my hip, I drove 3 hours to tell Robert Francis O'Rourke, also known as Beto, hell no, you're not taking our guns. That message resonated with millions of Americans, but sadly, the Democrat Party, isolated in their basements and gated mansions, still haven't gotten the message. Those on the left who'd steamroll the rights of law-abiding citizens are still at it. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle seem to be totally oblivious to the message Americans sent in 2020. Nearly 8.5 million Americans purchased a firearm for the very first time in 2020. With the left defunding the police, Antifa rioting, looting, burning down businesses, people made the reasonable and rational decision to take self-protection seriously and arm themselves. And the Democrat response? More regulations, more bureaucracy, more control, less freedom. Mr. Speaker, I'll say it again, and I'll say it nice and loud so everyone can hear me. Those on the left are still tucked away safely in their gated mansions with their armed security, ignoring everyday Americans. For me, this is a hell no. It's a hell no to government treading on our rights. It's a hell no to the regulations of our Second Amendment. It's a hell no to government trampling on our freedoms. All of these new gun laws will do is leave law-abiding citizens defenseless, while criminals, wait for it, break the law. So I have a few questions for my colleagues on the left. I want to know, why do you trust the American people so little? Why do you look down on them as lesser than you? How detached are you to believe that someone else's rights should be subject to bureaucratic permission, to your permission? Why is it okay to provide armed security for yourself, but take away the rights of Americans to do so themselves? Why do you feel the need to keep a registry of gun owners? Do you not trust the American people? Are you afraid of your neighbors? Do you despise their rights? How much power over the American people will it take to satisfy these radicals on the left? Our rights don't come from politicians. They come from God Almighty. Stop pretending to be God, do your job, and protect the rights of the American people. And with that, I yield, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Rosendale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to the extreme gun control measures being pushed by the Democratic majority. And make no mistake, they are extreme and an assault on our freedoms. The Second Amendment guarantees the right of every American to keep and bear arms. I am proud to be from the state with the highest rate of gun ownership in the nation. In Montana, law-abiding gun owners use firearms every day and exercise their God-given liberties. Mr. Speaker, the bills the House this week serve only to punish responsible gun owners and take away the Second Amendment rights of Montanans. H.R. 8 would not just require background checks for the sale of firearms, but for the changes of ownership and even the most temporary transfers of possession. Someone who simply hands a firearm to another person could be subject to a year in prison and a $100,000 fine. This would include the rancher who lends his gun to a neighbor whose cattle are being harassed by coyotes, or to the hunter who lends a rifle to a buddy who's going on a hunting trip. This is deeply troubling, as these scenarios are very common in Montana. H.R. 1446 is just as bad. While it claims to close a gun-buying loophole, it would give the FBI discretion to delay firearm purchases or transfers indefinitely, and could even put the burden on law-abiding citizens to prove that they are eligible to purchase a firearm. The framers of our Constitution did not intend for us to have to beg the government to be able to exercise our freedoms. In fact, they included the Second Amendment to make sure that we didn't have to. Shall not be infringed is extremely clear. Unfortunately, that's exactly the path the Democrats seem intent on pursuing. I thank my colleagues who stand with me today and urge all of my colleagues who cherish our constitutional liberties to join me in opposing these bills and any other bill that would infringe on our Second Amendment rights. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Miller.
I want to thank my friend and colleague, Congressman Biggs, for this special order. We swore an oath to defend the Constitution, which includes the Second Amendment. But now Democrats are going back on that oath by proposing H.R. 8, saying that we should enforce universal background checks on guns. Continuing to put forth far-reaching laws on guns will only significantly increase the burden of the millions of law-abiding Americans who wish to exercise their Second Amendment right to self-defense. In my state of Illinois, Chicago has the 4th strictest gun laws in the country, but criminal misuse of firearms in Chicago remains at the top of the list. This is because if there's one thing that we know about criminals, it's that they don't care about obeying the law. The Second Amendment was written to prevent the government from seizing arms. H.R. 8 is an attack on our right and is one step close to doing exactly what our founders were guarding against. We do not need to punish law-abiding citizens. Instead, we should do all we can to cherish and protect this right that we are so blessed to have. And I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. It's now my privilege to yield 2.5 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in defense of the Second Amendment and in opposition to H.R. 8, the Universal Background Checks Act. Federal law already restricts transferring firearms to prohibited individuals. Instead of working to strengthen the enforcement of laws currently on the books, this legislation will criminalize many activities that are common practice among law-abiding gun owners, while failing to prevent guns from getting into the hands of criminals. Criminals do not follow the law when obtaining their firearms, and nothing in the bill would prevent them from continuing to obtain firearms through avenues like the black market, through theft, or illegal straw purchases. Federal law already strictly prohibits the possession, receipt, or purchase of firearms by prohibited individuals, including convicted felons, fugitives from justice, unlawful users of controlled substances, illegal aliens, individuals subject to protective orders or convicted of a crime of domestic violence. Meanwhile, law-abiding citizens could face up to a year in prison and a $100,000 fine for common practices such as trades, private sales, gifts, or temporary loans of firearms if this bill becomes law. And lastly, I will note that under the rules of interpretation in H.R. 8, it says, and I quote, "Rules of interpretation, nothing in this act or any amendment made by this act shall be construed to authorize the establishment directly or indirectly of a national firearms registry." That is false. This bill will create a national registry. That's because every firearms transfer has to go through a federal firearm licensee's acquisition and disposition logbook. And every time a federal firearms license is not renewed, those records must be sent to the ATF for storage, who in turn scans those records into a database for future use. That is, in effect, a national firearms registry in the making. So, if the rules of interpretation of H.R. 8 are correctly followed, then one could logically argue that this bill actually prohibits itself, by its own words, of prohibiting directly or indirectly a national firearms registry. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I thank the gentleman from Georgia. I thank all of my colleagues. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield to myself such time as I may consume, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with so many of my friends who support the Second Amendment and oppose H.R. 8. I was talking earlier tonight about the Heller decision, where Justice Scalia said the Second Amendment is a pre-existing right. Justice Scalia wrote, "There seems to us no doubt on the basis of both his text and history that the Second Amendment conferred an individual right to keep and bear arms. He did state the right was not unlimited, but the bill being considered goes well beyond acceptable limitations." So H.R. 8 is another bill that the majority is bringing to the floor this session without a hearing or markup in the Judiciary Committee. Last Congress, the markup of H.R. 8 was cut short when the chairman of the committee introduced an amendment in the nature of a substitute right in the middle of the markup after Republicans repeatedly offered amendments highlighting flaws in the bill. He didn't allow members opposed to the amendment to speak or offer amendments, and he then called for the vote on the substitute amendment. This hurried process demonstrated that Democrats cared more about simply passing a bill than passing a good bill. H.R. 8 will not prevent recent shootings. In Parkland, the shooter acquired the firearm legally from an FFL after undergoing a NICS check. In Sutherland Springs, Texas, the shooter made purchases from an FFL following a NICS check. In Las Vegas, the shooter purchased his firearms from an FFL after a background check. And in Orlando, the shooter purchased his firearms legally from an FFL following a NICS check. I can go on. But there are so many more examples that are just the same. Because criminals who seek to do harm will get guns regardless of the new restrictions imposed by H.R. 8. That's just the nature of criminals. I was a prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney, I can tell you. That's the way criminals are. They violate the law. With very limited exceptions, H.R. 8 makes it illegal for Americans to get a gun if a non-licensed importer, manufacturer, or dealer is not involved. And how will the government know if an illegal transfer occurs? Eventually, the government will have to create a registry of all firearms and firearm owners so that they can track all transfers. That's what they want to do here. Without a registry, this bill is utterly unenforceable. I've heard supporters of this bill say that other countries have similar restrictions, so we need to do the same as well. But the reality, there is no other country on the face of this planet that has a Second Amendment where the founders of that country said the right to bear arms and protect yourself against government and individuals is a God-given right and deserves to be protected. It is, as Justice Scalia said, a pre-existing right. Supporters say that this bill is about saving lives. If that is what is important, then I would encourage every supporter of this bill to join me in co-sponsoring the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which actually will save lives. And I urge Speaker Pelosi to bring that bill to the floor today. I oppose this bill. I urge all of my colleagues to do the same. And with that, I thank you again to my colleagues for being here tonight. Mr. Speaker, to you for your presiding tonight, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Pursuant to Section 5A1B of House Resolution 8, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.